Welcome to Reinventing Parking, the podcast about parking policy for anyone who wants a better city and better urban transport. I'm your host, Paul Barter, and my guest this time is Yoga Adiwinarto, who is ITDP's country director for Indonesia. Welcome to the podcast, Yoga.
Thanks again for having me, Paul.
Before we get started, I want to give a very quick thank you to my supporters on Patreon. If you're not a patron yet, you can support my Reinventing Transport and Reinventing Parking efforts and find out more about what extras you will get in return by visiting patreon.com/Paul Barter. That's patreon.com/Paul Barter. Yeah. So I also interviewed Yoga for my other podcast, the Reinventing Transport podcast. And so this morning we've just finished that conversation and now we're turning to parking. But if you're interested in Jakarta's wider transport issues, then please do check out the Reinventing Transport podcast. Yoga has been with ITDP since 2009, and he's worked a lot on various issues, including BRT, demand management, and pedestrian improvements. And of course, our focus today is parking. Yoga is a civil engineer, and he has a master's in transport planning from Leeds University in the UK. And he also spent 3 years working in transport consulting in the UK after finishing his degree. And I guess, Yoga, you would have seen some quite sophisticated parking management in Leeds, very different from the situation in Jakarta. Is that right?
I wouldn't say Leeds much different, but like London, that's very different with Jakarta.
Okay. For people who haven't visited Indonesian cities or seen how parking works in Indonesian cities, I guess we should give a brief explanation of some of the what the scene that would greet people in the streets of Indonesian cities.
Parking space are like really abundant, off-street parking space, and also like on-street. You can still see in the like local roads, and especially the road with like so many restaurants, and then like parking just blocking not only the road but also a sidewalk. It's very common to have good sidewalk with like cars parked on top of it. So it's really like the car is king kind of culture. I think it's really still here in Jakarta, but also all over Indonesia.
One thing that struck me when I visited Indonesia and looked into the parking and might come as a surprise to people from countries where most on-street parking is free of charge. Actually, Indonesians are accustomed to paying something for their on-street parking, aren't they? There's these ubiquitous parking attendants known as juru parkir or jukir in Indonesian. And the payment is very small, but they're everywhere, aren't they? So the challenge is not to introduce paid parking, is it? It's to improve the arrangements for parking, both supply and management and pricing.
Yeah, that is correct. The problem with this, what you call jukir, I mean, when we call it jukir, it implies that it's kind of like a formal, the guy with the blue shirt employed by the city. But in fact, you can just have, like, for example, you open a restaurant and then suddenly you just have like one guy approach you and it's like, oh, can I manage the parking, here? So basically what he wasn't asking for your permission. He was just like letting you know that, this is like a parking spot, even though you own it, but I'll be the guy who get the revenue.
That's interesting. So it's like, say you've got a front yard of a restaurant and you're going to have parking in your front yard. The guy who's managing that parking is actually kind of like a freelancer. Okay, very interesting.
Yeah, so those like typically just like local guy. If you are also firm, you can say, okay, let's just make it like 30-70. You get the 70%, I'll get the 30% or the other one. Like revenue sharing kind of thing.
In some cities, it's actually like that in the street too, isn't it? That the parking attendants are actually very informal. The arrangement between the city and them. In some cities, it's a little more formal, but in some cities, it's like this freelance arrangement too. Is that right?
Yeah, so we did maybe investigation or like just some kind of like in-depth study on this. Typically what happened was that this parking attendant, they get, okay, this is my authority, my jurisdiction, which is really small, like, from this pole up to this light pole. So, like, from lamppost to lamppost, the way that they work is like, they just collect all the money without giving any receipt or anything like that. And then they have to pay for certain amount of money. So it's not a revenue sharing kind of thing. It's more like a rent, like they just pay a certain amount of money, let's say $10 per day.
Is that to the city? The guy on top is the city government?
Eventually, yes. So this is more like a coordinator. They're given, like, what the so-called target. Let's say $10 per day. If you don't achieve the target, then you have to use your own money to pay to this like coordinator role. And then the coordinator will also kind of like compile all this, and then they will then give to the city government, like, to the office, local office, and then this is basically the parking revenue. Now the problem is that obviously, the juru parkir or the parking attendant, definitely if they have like target $10, like they will not only earn $10, like they probably earn like 15 or even like $20. They basically use it for their own, just go into their pocket. The similar concept also with the sort of like coordinator role, because I think coordinator also not really a city owned employee, they're also like a freelance, but they act as like coordinator. So
Okay.
they get some cut, probably they basically define their own cut. And they also, I think, they're given like certain amount of target, so they have to put it, like, give it to the city.
For some international perspective, this is an interesting hybrid, isn't it? Because there are many places in the world where there are sort of totally informal, illegal parking attendants, and they just collect everything, and they're essentially illegal. But in Indonesia, they're legal, but it's got nothing to do with parking management. It's just the city sees that this has been happening and says, okay, we'll let you do this, but you need to give us some rent. Correct?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
As I understand it, it's usually as you leave, it's not based on how long you were parked there, usually.
That's right. If I go to the convenience store for like 2 minutes or 3 minutes, I'll pay the same with the guy who like spent maybe 8 hours working there. So there is no justice.
And even worse than that, like duration-based fees for on-street parking, basically this is our number one sort of tool. And the key idea, usually in busy streets with any kind of businesses, is that we would like to nudge the people who are parking for long durations, the all-day parkers, the commuters. We want to nudge them somewhere else, maybe a quieter street a little further away, or to the off-street parking, which is often half empty. But if you've got this kind of arrangement, even though fees are being collected, they're absolutely not achieving that goal. In fact, the incentive is to park all day instead of for a short period.
Exactly, yeah, and that it happens a lot in the old traditional commercial street, where typically you go there and it's like you cannot find parking, but it's not because of the parking is full. It's because all parking space in front of their shop is reserved for the owner. So this is really I think there's like one area in South Jakarta called like Block M, and you just have all this reserve with, like, they just put like chair, or like they put like some kind of boxes there. And I just, like, when I ask, can I, I want to go to the shop, can I park here? Oh no, actually this is for the owner. Yeah, because I think the owner basically maybe pay more to this parking guy, like, I want to reserve this, and then you get a lot of, you get more money. I was like, okay, that's fine.
Okay, interesting. In Jakarta, at least, and in certain other cities, Surabaya, Bandung, there's been some efforts to reform this system with introducing parking meters. But if I understand correctly, ITDP has, maybe you've been involved a little bit in those trials, but you have some suggestions for, I guess we should start by what have those trials been doing, but then we'll talk about how ITDP has some ideas for how to improve them. So maybe start with some trials of parking meters in certain districts of Jakarta. What has been done?
So yeah, so in 2000, starting 2013 and 14, they started this using the parking meter. It's really like quite expensive parking meter. So they did a trial in north of Jakarta, and then the evaluation actually suggests it's only for the revenue generation, because if you have the traditional parking, like, you don't really know actually how much the parking earn, and also what is the parking frequencies and everything. Like there's no data. But with that, I think the increase of revenue is really significant. I think it's more like 10 times than before.
Wow.
They still see as like more like a profit or like revenue maximization.
It's just rent. Yeah.
Yeah, but then now, like, oh, okay, now you don't have to. So the parking attendant is paid by like salary. So their target, like basically their task is to ensure that people that park have to go into this parking meter, pay, and that's it. And then pay according to the time. But they also charge by by hour, by duration.
Yeah, that's an improvement, at least the duration based. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it doesn't give you the true management itself. So even though oh yeah, we have dedicated, like let's say 100 parking on street parking space, but then these guys are really clever. Hey, you guys need parking? You can park here, and then like parking parallel, and then you can like double parking, and then just put it your gear at neutral, and we can just push your, like, move around your car. So in terms of the parking management, it doesn't really work because they still allow like double parking, even like overflowing. Even though those revenues still go into the parking meter, but we still see, like, there's no improvement in terms of the spaces, space usage and everything like that.
Okay. So these parking attendants, they're employees of the pricing company. Their mandate is just to maximize how much money goes into those parking meters, but not to manage the parking and make sure it's orderly. So you need you need a second group of wardens who
Yeah.
are focused on the orderly parking and the illegal parking. But that they don't exist. That there's a deficiency in that department.
Yes, they put so many trial, like with the clamp, and then it took them quite a while, quite a lot, and then yeah, they need to have like a lot of manpower, and also at the same time they want to they employ a lot of the tow truck, so they start towing. But again, I mean, the amount of violation, and then it's not really equal with the amount of staff and also resources put in the, like, enforcement.
Yeah, so ITDP Indonesia has some suggestions. So what are you suggesting? And
The city perception on parking meter is only to maximize their profit, or like to maximize the revenue, which is fine. But then they don't really have the, like, some kind of target to at least make sure that there are like parking spaces still available, maybe 90% of occupancy, then you still have, like, people coming with like one parking spot open. So I think the roots of the problem is because still lack of the policy and regulation on the enforcement side. So right now there is no connection between the parking attendant and the tow truck guy. So the tow truck kind of like a city-owned employee, whereas the parking attendant are more like a parking company's employee, and they just don't really have like some kind of connection. So I think this revenue collection, enforcement, and also the fine, that needs to be defined quite well.
do you think that's just a matter of improving the contract? So making sure that the contract includes this enforcement goal, or is it more than that?
Yeah, I mean, one thing is that, but also on the other hand, like, we also saw that, we heard that from that time that, oh, this parking meter costs like $20,000 or something, or like $10,000, so we cannot really have more. Again, at the same time, there are more and more like cheaper technology, like, for example, like handheld devices, which proven to be actually reliable. Because the problem is that yes, there is a pilot, but then we cannot apply the whole the system, the whole area in Jakarta, because the lack of investment made on this. So I think we need to have more and more on the cheaper technology, and like make sure that it basically can be scaled up to city level. There is also a resistance on the increasing the parking fee. Like right now, it's on like still 5,000 rupiah, or like about 50 cent, or even less per hour. And that needs to be modified, I think.
I guess 50 cents per hour in the context of a middle income country is still, it's better than the previous situation, which was something like 5 cents for unlimited parking. So it's a slight improvement, but yes, I guess the thing is, we don't prejudge the price, right? We just wait and see what price is necessary to achieve the occupancy.
Exactly.
If you've got the right sort of goals in mind, yeah. I gather ITDP India. I interviewed Shreya from ITDP India a few months ago, and they are hoping to introduce a system in Chennai to price parking in the streets, and it'll be based on mobile phone based payments with some alternatives. So it'll be interesting to compare notes with them as you go forward. I guess my last question about on-street parking is: have any cities in Indonesia yet tried a mobile-based or handheld device-based payment system, or is that still waiting to happen?
No, they did actually, like in not far from Jakarta, in Bekasi, which is kind of like one of the municipality outside Jakarta. They also did one in, I think, Semarang and Jogja. So yeah, I mean, in terms of like cost effectiveness, it has proven to be quite cost effective. And again, like the city with not really heavy traffic volume, or like parking volume, then you don't want to invest in like $20,000 machine, put it like 110 or something, and then where you don't, like, your break even and everything will be quite long. So I think this, at least in the small cities, you can have a tool, affordable tool, and also technology to actually manage the parking and get the data of the parking itself.
In those cases, it was the parking attendant that had the handheld, and people would pay cash to the parking attendant, or was it people paying with their mobile phones?
They still did it like a trial, so they haven't talked that much. But I think the idea is to also have the smart card, which is like used in the BRT, or like public transport, but also toll road.
Ah, okay. So everyone has one of these cards, and so they can pay for parking with that.
At least if you're car users in Jakarta, the chances like for you to have this kind of card is really big, because you have to go into like toll road and you have to pay the toll road. But the other thing is also the opportunity is through the like GoPay or OVO, which is kind of like the payment system done by the third, like the ride hailing company. Because they really use, and also like it's more like a QR code based payment. Yeah, I think that could be a potential for us to develop.
So cashless certainly seems to be the way to go, and
Yeah.
not based on parking meters. Okay, let's quickly talk about off-street parking supply. There's a national standard, isn't there, with rather excessive parking minimums for buildings. There's not very much city-owned public parking, if I understand correctly, but most buildings have a lot of parking, and a lot of them will open it to the public. So like, shopping malls or hotels will have parking open to the public and people have to pay. But again, the fees are rather low. But can you talk about parking minimums and what ITDP is doing to sort of try to change that situation?
Yeah, parking minimum is a battle for us. I mean, even took us 10 years in Mexico City, right, just to get rid of this parking minimum. In fact, in Jakarta, we were also surprised that we started the to highlight the issue, to make the awareness to the city, and then they decided, oh yeah, we're actually now drafting a revision to the parking regulation, and we will just put the minimum into maximum.
Interesting.
Wow, I mean that's a lot. Yeah. So this is something that we want to see. Again, I don't think it will happen. They said that it's currently under consultation, but I don't think it'll happen this year, because they need to get approval from the city council, and then the city council will, because of the election, and the city council will change in October, maybe next year. Then hopefully, if the discussion is going smoothly,
Okay.
turn minimum into maximum.
We should watch this space and have you back on the show in a year's time and see what happened. Yeah. Okay. So you're very interested in maximums, right? You're hoping to limit parking in transit oriented areas.
The issue for us, like even the maximum parking is is applied, I don't think the impact will happen quite fast. So we are currently in discussion with the governor himself. How can we accelerate these things? This like a one little exercise that we did along the MRT corridor on the north part, which is kind of like on the Sudirman and Tamrin area, like the most sort of prominent promenade in Jakarta. We did the survey along the road, and I think it's only like 5 kilometers long. And then the amount of parking is about 38,000 spaces, like off-street parking. on those buildings. I mean, clearly you have 38,000 spaces. No wonder Jakarta is congested every day. Like the road capacity is pretty much like lower than that.
That's the area where the MRT goes now, correct?
Exactly, exactly. So we're thinking that we need to also to reduce the existing spaces, and the next survey that we did was that we also monitor the occupancy the majority of these buildings, and then surprisingly, like 70% occupancy during the peak hour, during the busy hour where people actually on the office. In many of the buildings, they even close the spaces because, like for example, they have like 8 stories parking building, and they only like open until like 4, and even like the 4 stories they're not full. So they already sort of like voluntarily give up the space, like half of the parking space, and then they just put it like for storage, which is not really money generating. So we're thinking to the government right now, like maybe there is a need for us to convert those parking spaces. So like start with the parking spaces that really not being used at all, and then second will be like to offer like some kind of like incentive, because I mean if you start sort of like conversion, like converting it to more like retail space, maybe even like co-working space, for example, that basically will generate more money, not so much maybe on the residential, because some people think, oh, maybe we can put like affordable housing. Yeah, maybe not not yet. I think that's too soon, but I think making it more sort of like you don't have to change the building structure.
Yeah. So the housing side of the coin, I guess it would be developers building housing also face parking minimums, which increases the cost. Do the parking minimums even apply to developers building housing that is targeted at, say, middle or lower middle or working poor kind of incomes? So they all have to provide parking at an excessive rate?
Yeah, but it's different different unit. So they have like also a category. So I think it's like one parking every 10 units. Whereas if you go into like a premium, you have to put like one parking space every unit, or like even like two, or like sorry, 1.5 actually. In fact, what we saw in the regulation.
So residential parking minimums are still an issue, a problem, but not quite as bad as we find in some cities where it's just a simple. Some cities just have this simple thing of one car parking space, no matter what, and it's awful. It means that affordable housing is not affordable anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so that's at least something to be grateful for in Indonesia. Okay, one final question, I guess. It always shocks me a little bit and surprises me when I visit a country and find that the commercial parking industry, buildings that have commercial parking open to the public, face price controls in some countries. And some Indonesian cities, not all of them, but I guess you could say most Indonesian cities seem to have price controls, even for private sector commercial parking. Is that still the case in Jakarta?
It is. They Jakarta still use the maximum range, so like maximum and minimum. So so you have the price control. To make it worse, this price control has to be approved by the city council. And when we ask why, oh, because it will affect the majority of the people. What people? This is actually so something that we question. The first is like why you need to control, and also the second is like why parking needs to be approved by the city council. Car users only account like 20%. And the argument is also at the same time, oh, but yeah, if you're charging parking for the off street, the money will go to private sector, so you cannot just make the private sector rich.
Yeah, my usual answer to that is that, okay, if you're worried that deregulating parking pricing will cause the price to go up, which it probably won't. If there's excessive parking, probably the price wouldn't go up very fast anyway. So you probably don't need to worry about that. It would only be a future thing once we perhaps impose maximums. Then the price might eventually gradually go up. But secondly, if you're worried about excessive profits by private business, well, what's our usual answer to that? It's taxation, right? You can tax
Exactly.
excessive profits. So it's not really a problem that needs price controls. It's a problem that needs the proper taxation, and you just have to bite the bullet and do that instead. Currently, it's a cross subsidy for rich people to park their cars. By the way, the motorcycle price is typically just half the four-wheeler price. Is that correct?
Yes, but then more often actually they're given very little space. So like you can see if it's like in the offices or like in the shopping malls, motorcycle parking actually they park outside because well, A is cheap, it's cheaper than the inside, but also yeah because of the like you can still find just like a small piece of land, and they just like put like 1,000 motorcycle parking. And again, I think this is also the case not only in Jakarta in Indonesia, but I recently visited Ho Chi Minh and then did a little survey there, and the same thing. Like they many motorcycle they prefer to just park in this off sort of like off street, but not really a formal one
Right.
because that's like much cheaper than go to the shopping mall.
Okay. And they're very, very space efficient, aren't they? And so, in theory, half the car price is way too high, right? Because you can have about 8 or maybe even 15 motorcycle spaces per car space in an off-street
Yeah.
parking
Yeah,
environment.
exactly. Yeah.
Once you take account of the aisles and the ramps and things, yeah. Which brings me actually to park and ride, because I often say park and ride is great if it's for two-wheelers because it's very space efficient, and it's okay if it's far from the city centre in the low-density areas. But what's happening in Jakarta and the Jakarta region with park and ride?
This is something that I think misunderstanding or misconception of this park and ride. So we have this a regulation, focusing on the transit-oriented development or TOD. They put like a special like okay in the TOD area the parking minimum can be adjusted. So like can basically have lower minimum parking requirement. But then they also put like yeah, but then in TOD area you can also have a park and ride.
Uh-huh.
That is like shocking to me.
Yes.
Why would you have the park and ride? For example, one of the TOD that they kind of like talking is in the Duku Atas area where they have like very, very good connections. Even the airport rail is in the area. Why would you want to to build like another park and ride where you can easily access the area with the public transport?
Mm.
So I think, yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you about like, I think the density, like lower density and also in the outskirt, because that actually happens a lot with the railway. Because the railway, like the commuter railway or KRL, like people who lives in Bogor or like Bekasi, they kind of like live 30 to 60 kilometers away from the city. So for them it's just practical to just use motorcycle there, drop the motorcycle and then use the train. But maybe for Transjakarta or even like the metro or the MRT might not be too relevant for the park and ride.
Okay, I've taken a lot of your time, Yoga, and thank you very much for sharing all these insights on Jakarta and Indonesia parking.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Paul.
You've been listening to the Reinventing Parking podcast, and I'm Paul Barter. You can find out more at reinventingparking.org, where you'll find ideas and tips on parking policy. You can also listen to other episodes, subscribe, or leave a comment. That's reinventingparking.org. Bye for now.